I spent 12 years building this dream from nothing, and then he stood before me, shredding my resignation letter in front of the entire board of directors, looking me in the eye and laughing. He thought he'd won, but Marcus didn't know. I'd been laying this trap for years, and when it finally snapped shut, he'd be the first one buried beneath the rubble. The paper fragments floated to the conference room floor like snow, each piece a reminder of his arrogance. He had no idea those weren't the documents that mattered. My name is Emily Carter, and I joined Apex Dynamics when it was nothing more than a desperate dream housed in a cramped office above a pawn shop in downtown Seattle. 5 of us. That's all we were. 5 sleep-deprived engineers surviving on instant ramen and the stubborn belief that we could change the world. I was 22 then, fresh out of MIT with a head full of theories and hands that couldn't stop building, while my classmates chased 6-figure salaries at Google and Apple. I chose the rickety stairs leading to that second-floor office where the heating barely worked and the ceiling leaked every time it rained, which, in Seattle, meant constantly. The first prototype I built sat on a workbench I'd assembled from scrap wood. I hand-soldered every circuit, wrote every line of code, tested and retested until my eyes burned and my fingers bled. 3:30 a.m. became my closest friend. The hum of machinery became my lullaby. I lived and breathed those inventions, pouring every ounce of my soul into metal and silicon. Our breakthrough came 18 months later. A revolutionary chip design that reduced power consumption by 70% while tripling processing speed. I remember the exact moment it worked, standing alone in that dimly lit office at 2:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, watching the data stream across my monitor. No champagne celebration, no cheering crowd, just me, the gentle whir of cooling fans, and the knowledge that I'd just created something extraordinary. That patent was the first of many. Over the next decade, I developed 31 more, each one building on the last, creating an ecosystem of technology that would eventually power everything from smartphones to satellite systems. My innovations transformed Apex from that 5-person startup into a multinational corporation worth billions. But here's what nobody tells you about success. While you're buried in the lab, focused on creation and innovation, others are playing different games. Politics, power, positioning. I never attended the cocktail parties, never learned to speak the language of boardrooms and hostile takeovers. My world was clean. Algorithms and equations, problems with definitive solutions. I believed that merit spoke for itself, that good work would always be recognized and rewarded. My colleagues respected me. The original team treated me like family. When we moved from that leaking office to our first real headquarters, they insisted my lab be 3 times larger than anyone else's. Emily needs room to think, our founding CEO used to say, laughing. Give her space and she'll give us miracles. And I did. Patent after patent, innovation after innovation. My name appeared in technical journals, on award certificates, in the fine print of every major product we released. I was Apex's secret weapon, the engine driving our astronomical growth. The engineering team would bring me their impossible problems, and I'd disappear into my lab for days, emerging with solutions that shouldn't have existed. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was secure. After all, how could they possibly run Apex without the person who understood every circuit, every line of code, every patent that made our technology valuable? But I was naive. While I was solving technical problems, others were solving a different equation: how to extract maximum value while minimizing the cost of genius. The seeds of betrayal weren't planted overnight. They were scattered slowly, carefully. Over years of board meetings I didn't attend, strategic discussions I wasn't invited to, and alliances formed in spaces I never thought to occupy. The first warning sign came when we went public. Suddenly, there were shareholders to please, quarterly reports to maximize, and a board of directors who looked at my lab like an expensive liability rather than the birthplace of our success. But I ignored it, convinced that my work would continue to speak for itself. I was wrong. In the corporate world, the loudest voice wins, not the most brilliant mind, And I had spent so many years in the beautiful silence of creation that I'd forgotten to protect what I'd built. The merger happened on a Thursday. I learned about it the same way everyone else did, through a company-wide email sent at 8:15 a.m. Apex Dynamics was being acquired by Titan Holdings, a conglomerate known for buying tech companies and squeezing them dry. The email assured us nothing would change, that this was an exciting opportunity for growth and innovation. Corporate speak for prepare for the massacre. Marcus Hale arrived the following Monday. I watched from my lab window as his Tesla pulled into the executive parking spot, saw him step out in his perfectly tailored suit, his hair slicked back like some Wall Street vampire. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd never built anything with his own hands, never stayed up until 4 a.m. debugging code, never felt the satisfaction of solving an impossible problem. His background was in sales, luxury cars, pharmaceutical companies, anything with a high profit margin and low moral threshold. The board brought him in to maximize efficiency and streamline operations. Within his first week, he'd already scheduled meetings with every department head, except me. The changes started small. First, he relocated the executive offices to the top floor, installing glass walls and Italian marble that cost more than my entire annual research budget. Then came the consultants, an army of 20-somethings with MBAs and no understanding of what we actually did, crawling through every department with their clipboards and efficiency metrics. My first real interaction with Marcus came 3 weeks after his arrival. He summoned me to his office at 2 p.m. sharp. I arrived to find him sitting behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, studying a presentation on his laptop. "Emily," he said without looking up, "I've been reviewing your department's expenses. $40 million last year. That's unsustainable." I stood there, stunned. That 40 million generated patents worth over 2 billion in licensing fees. He finally looked at me then, his eyes cold and calculating. "Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. I'm cutting your budget by 60%. You'll need to prioritize." Prioritize? I have 7 projects in development. Each one could revolutionize. "Then pick 3. He turned back to his screen, dismissing me like I was some intern. "Oh, and Emily? Start including my name on all patent applications going forward. As CEO, I should be recognized as a co-inventor." The rage that filled me in that moment was volcanic, but I swallowed it, nodded, and left his office. That night, I pulled up my original employment contract and read through every line. That's when I found it, buried in subsection 12, paragraph 4. The clause my lawyer had insisted on all those years ago. I'd forgotten it existed, but there it was, my safety net written in legal black and white. Over the next months, Marcus systematically dismantled everything I'd built. He canceled projects, reassigned my best engineers, and started presenting my work as his own. The board loved him. Stock prices rose as he cut unnecessary expenses. He gave presentations filled with my technical innovations, explaining them with just enough accuracy to sound credible while taking full credit for their development. I documented everything, every email, every revised presentation where my name mysteriously disappeared, every meeting where he presented my patents as collaborative efforts under his leadership. My laptop became a vault of evidence, backed up in 3 different locations, encrypted and secure. The final insult came when he reorganized the company structure. Suddenly, I wasn't reporting directly to the CEO anymore. Instead, I was placed under a newly created Chief Innovation Officer, a 30-year-old Harvard grad who couldn't tell a resistor from a capacitor, but who happened to be Marcus's former fraternity brother. My lab access was restricted to standard business hours. My requisitions required 3 levels of approval. Patent applications were reviewed by people who didn't understand the basic science behind them. Marcus was systematically erasing me from the company I'd helped build, reducing me from architect to anonymous cog. But I kept working, kept inventing, kept filing patents, because I knew something Marcus didn't. In his arrogance, he'd never actually read my original contract. He assumed corporate lawyers had written something standard, something favorable to the company. He never imagined that a 22-year-old engineer might have been smart enough to protect herself. Every slight, every humiliation, every stolen credit only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was building a trap so perfect, so complete, that when it finally sprang, Marcus Hale would understand what it meant to steal from someone who could create something from nothing. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday. I wasn't supposed to be there. Marcus had removed me from the attendee list months ago, but I received a last-minute summons at 9:45 a.m. His assistant's email was curt. "Mr. Hale requires your immediate presence in the boardroom." I knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. The 12 board members sat around the polished conference table, their faces ranging from uncomfortable to smugly amused. Marcus stood at the head of the table, holding a piece of paper I recognized immediately, the resignation letter I'd submitted to him privately 3 days earlier. Emily," Marcus announced, his voice dripping with false concern. "So glad you could join us. I wanted to share some news with the board, and I thought you should be here for it." He held up my letter, making sure everyone could see it. "Our esteemed Ms. Carter has decided to pursue other opportunities. After 12 years, she's abandoning the company she claims to have built?" I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me. Inside, my heart was racing, but I'd learned to hide my emotions behind the same calm mask I wore during marathon debugging sessions. "However," Marcus continued, his lips curling into a predatory smile, "I don't think we should accept this resignation. Do you know why?" The board members shifted in their seats. Richard Walsh, one of the original investors, cleared his throat nervously, but no one spoke. "Because," Marcus said, walking toward me with deliberate slowness, "Emily here seems to think she owns this company. She thinks her little inventions make her irreplaceable. She thinks she can hold us hostage with her knowledge." He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "But here's the thing, Emily, you're not irreplaceable. You're not even necessary anymore. We have your patents. We have your designs. We have everything we need." Then he did it. Holding my gaze, Marcus lifted the resignation letter and tore it in half. The sound echoed in the silent boardroom. He tore it again and again, until it was nothing but confetti. "You don't get to quit, Emily," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're terminating you, effective immediately. Security will escort you out within the hour." The pieces of paper fluttered to the floor between us. Someone, I think it was Harrison from Acquisitions, actually chuckled. The sound was quickly stifled, but it had been there. Public humiliation, complete degradation. This wasn't just about removing me, it was about destroying me. I looked at the scattered pieces of paper, then slowly raised my eyes to meet Marcus's gaze. I could see the victory there, the absolute certainty that he'd won. He expected tears, perhaps, or anger, maybe begging. Instead, I nodded once, slowly, deliberately. "I understand," I said, my voice perfectly level. "May I ask, is this termination being processed through proper HR channels? For the record?" Marcus laughed. "For the record? This is the record. Emily, the board has witnessed it. That's all the process we need. Although if it makes you feel better, HR will have your termination paperwork ready by the time security arrives at your lab." "Without cause?" I asked, allowing just a hint of curiosity into my voice. "Oh, we have cause," Marcus replied. "Insubordination, failure to follow company directives, excessive spending without results. Take your pick." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each board member. Most looked away. Only Richard Walsh met my gaze, and I saw something there. Not sympathy exactly, but discomfort. He'd been there from the beginning. He knew what I'd built. "Very well," I said. "I assume I'll receive this termination in writing?" "Within the hour," Marcus confirmed, already turning away, dismissing me. "Security will be at your lab in 30 minutes. I suggest you start packing." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Marcus?" He glanced back, eyebrow raised. Thank you, I said. The confusion that flickered across his face was worth everything. I walked out of that boardroom with my head high, my stride steady, my heart singing, because Marcus Hale, in his arrogance and need for public dominance, had just made the one mistake I'd been waiting for. He'd violated the termination clause of my contract, publicly, with 12 witnesses, and he'd done it with such theatrical flair that no one could claim it hadn't happened. Back in my lab, I didn't pack. Instead, I placed a single phone call to my lawyer, speaking just 4 words. Project Raven is active. Then I sat in my chair, surrounded by the innovations I'd created, the dreams I'd built into reality, and waited for security. When they arrived 25 minutes later, I was smiling. They thought it was shock. Marcus probably thought it was defeat. But it was neither. It was the smile of someone who'd just watched their opponent walk into a carefully laid trap, one that had been 9 years in the making. The storage unit in Bellevue had been rented under my mother's maiden name for 9 years. 20 square feet of climate-controlled space holding 3 filing cabinets and a safe that required both biometric and combination access. I arrived there at 11:30 p.m. the night of my termination, after spending the day pretending to be devastated, letting concerned former colleagues buy me drinks while I acted appropriately destroyed. Inside the safe sat the original employment contract, not the digitized version in Apex's HR system, but the actual paper document with wet signatures and, most importantly, the addendums that had somehow never made it into the corporate database. My lawyer at the time, Patricia Stern, had been paranoid about tech companies and their tendency to conveniently lose inconvenient paperwork. She'd insisted on blockchain authentication before blockchain was even a household word. I spread the documents across the floor of the storage unit, using my phone's flashlight to read the crucial passage for the 100th time. Section 12.4.3. In the event of termination without cause, or termination conducted outside of established human resources protocols as defined in the Employee Handbook, Appendix B, all intellectual property rights for patents, designs, and innovations created by the employee during their tenure shall automatically revert to the employee, with full ownership and licensing rights transferred immediately upon such termination. The beauty was in the specificity. Patricia had defined established HR protocols to include written warnings, performance improvement plans, and proper documentation filed with the HR department at least 30 days before termination. Marcus's theatrical boardroom humiliation violated every single requirement. But the contract went deeper. Subsection 12.4.3.2 specified that any attempt to claim ownership of the employee's intellectual property after improper termination would result in immediate transfer of all rights, retroactive to the date of creation. And here was the masterstroke. Subsection 12.4.3.3 stated that public termination in front of board members without HR presence constituted aggravated breach of contract. Project Raven wasn't just about the contract, though, over the past 9 years, I'd meticulously documented every patent, every design, every innovation, not just the official filings, but the development process, lab notebooks, prototype photos, time-stamped code repositories, even security footage of me working alone at 3 a.m. while developing critical breakthroughs. Everything was backed up on a distributed blockchain system I'd created myself, with timestamps that couldn't be altered or disputed. 31 patents, each worth millions in licensing fees, the core technology that powered everything Apex sold. And as of 10:27 a.m. this morning, when Marcus tore up that letter, they all belonged to me. Patricia Stern had retired 5 years ago, but she'd handed my account to her protege, David Kim, a former software engineer turned intellectual property attorney who understood both the technology and the law. When I called him with the activation phrase, he'd already begun preparing. By the time I reached the storage unit, he'd sent me a secure message. Confirmation received, 12 board witnesses identified, security footage requisitioned, HR confirms no documentation on file. We're gold. I pulled out the second set of documents, Incorporation papers for a company I'd registered 9 years ago. Prometheus Technologies, LLC. Dormant all this time, waiting for activation. The company existed for one purpose: to hold and license intellectual property. As of tonight, it would become the most valuable technology licensing firm in Seattle. The third filing cabinet contained something else: correspondence. Every email Marcus had sent claiming credit for my work, every presentation where he'd removed my name, every board meeting minute where he'd described his innovations, evidence of systematic intellectual property theft that would make the improper termination look like a parking violation by comparison. At 1:15 a.m., I sent David the go-ahead. By morning, 3 things would happen simultaneously. First, formal notice would be sent to Apex's board informing them of the automatic IP transfer due to contract breach. Second, cease and desist orders would be filed for any continued use of my patents without licensing agreements. Third, and most devastatingly, notifications would go out to every major client of Apex, informing them that the patents underlying their products were now under new ownership. I locked the storage unit and drove home through the empty Seattle streets. Marcus thought he'd destroyed me in that boardroom. He thought those torn pieces of paper were my dreams scattering across his expensive carpet. But that resignation letter? It was never real. I'd printed it that morning, knowing exactly how he'd react, knowing his ego would demand a public execution. The real resignation letter, the one I'd never send, was written 9 years ago. The same day I signed that modified contract, it said simply, "I resign effective the moment you reveal who you really are." Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably celebrating, maybe telling the story of how he'd put the uppity engineer in her place. Let him enjoy it. In approximately 6 hours, he'd wake up to discover that he hadn't just killed the golden goose. He'd handed it to me on a silver platter, along with the entire farm. The wine tasted like patience rewarded, like justice served at exactly the right temperature. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The first call came at 6:43 a.m. Richard Walsh, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Emily, what the hell is this letter my legal team just received?" I was already dressed, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, monitoring Apex's stock price in pre-market trading. "Good morning, Richard. I assume you're referring to the notice of intellectual property transfer?" "Transfer? Emily, this says you own every patent you developed at Apex. That's impossible." "Actually, it's quite possible. Section 12.4.3 of my original employment contract. I'm sure your legal team is reviewing it now." Silence. Then, "That termination yesterday. Marcus said HR approved it." "Did they? You were there. Richard, did you see anyone from HR? Did Marcus follow any of the protocols outlined in the employee handbook? The one your board approved, by the way." I heard papers rustling, muffled voices in the background. Richard came back on the line. "Our lawyers are saying this can't be enforceable." "Your lawyers are welcome to that opinion. However, my attorneys at Stern & Associates disagree, as do the 3 independent IP experts who've already reviewed the case. I believe their assessments have been forwarded to your inbox." The second call came 12 minutes later. Marcus himself, practically screaming, "You conniving bitch! You think you can steal from me?" "Steal?" I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. "Marcus, I'm simply exercising my contractual rights. You know, that contract you never bothered to read, because you assumed I was just another naive engineer." "Those patents belong to Apex." "They did, until 10:27 yesterday morning when you terminated me improperly in front of the entire board. Really, Marcus, such a dramatic performance, though I particularly enjoyed the paper tearing. Very theatrical. I'll bury you in litigation. You'll be in court for the next decade. Perhaps, of course, while we're in court, you won't be able to use any of my patents. That's going to make producing your flagship products rather difficult, isn't it? How long before your clients start looking for alternatives?" The line went dead. I smiled and pulled up my email. 17 messages from major tech companies, all wanting to discuss licensing agreements. The news had leaked, as I knew it would. Nothing travels faster in Silicon Valley than blood in the water. By 9 a.m., Apex's stock had dropped 12%. By noon, it was down 23%. CNBC was running a breaking news segment. Apex Dynamics in crisis. Core patents allegedly transferred to former employee. David Kim called at 2:15 p.m. They've made an offer. $50 million for full transfer back. No. Emily, that's a substantial... David, they generated $2 billion last year from my patents. $50 million is insulting. What do you want? I want them to understand what they've lost, decline the offer, and send notices to Samsung, Apple, and Qualcomm that we're now accepting licensing bids. The next 3 days were a beautiful symphony of chaos. Apex's largest client threatened to suspend orders until the patent situation was resolved. 2 board members resigned. The SEC announced they were investigating potential disclosure violations. And Marcus? Security footage from the building showed him leaving the office at 11 p.m. each night, looking increasingly haggard. On day 4, Patricia Stern herself came out of retirement to attend a meeting with Apex's board. She called me afterward, chuckling. You should have seen their faces when I showed them the blockchain authentication from 9 years ago. Their general counsel actually asked if we could have somehow faked timestamps on a distributed ledger. The poor man looked ready to cry. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. A whistleblower inside Apex, one of my former engineers, leaked a folder of emails to TechCrunch. The subject line that went viral: Marcus Hale instructing staff to remove Emily Carter's name from all patent documentation, dated 6 months before my termination. The headline read, CEO attempted to steal engineer's innovations before illegal termination. Within hours, 3 institutional investors announced they were reviewing their positions. The board called an emergency meeting, and my phone rang with a call from Harrison Vaughn, chairman of the board. Emily, we need to resolve this. What are your terms? My terms are simple. Harrison, I want Marcus gone. I want a public acknowledgement of my contributions, and I want proper compensation for the use of my intellectual property. The first 2 are manageable. What compensation are you seeking? I looked at the number I'd written on the notepad in front of me, the one David and I had calculated based on projected revenues. 3% royalty on all products using my patents, retroactive to the date of filing, or you can buy me out completely for $800 million. The sharp intake of breath was audible. That's excessive. That's mathematics. Harrison, your own financial reports show those patents generate over $1 billion annually. I'm actually being generous. We'll need to discuss this with the board. Of course, you have 48 hours. After that, I sign with Samsung. As I ended the call, I pulled up Marcus's LinkedIn profile. His status had been updated an hour ago. Exploring new opportunities. The king was falling, and I hadn't even played my final card yet. The boardroom at Apex headquarters had been redesigned since my termination 2 weeks ago. Gone was Marcus's ostentatious glass and chrome. They'd restored the original oak table, the one we'd bought at auction when we could barely afford it. I took this as a sign. They were trying to remind me of the old days, appeal to sentiment. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, wearing the same outfit I'd worn the day they'd hired me 12 years ago. A simple black suit, no jewelry except my MIT class ring. David Kim accompanied me, along with Patricia Stern, who'd insisted on being present for what she called the most beautiful contract execution of the century. The entire board was present, minus Marcus, whose nameplate had been removed. Harrison Vaughn stood when I entered, followed reluctantly by the others. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was almost comical. Emily, Harrison began, gesturing to a seat. Thank you for coming. I remained standing. I assume you've had time to review my terms. We have, he slid a folder across the table. We're prepared to offer $400 million for complete transfer of the patents back to Apex. I didn't touch the folder. My terms were $800 million or 3% royalty in perpetuity. Those terms haven't changed. Be reasonable, Emily. 400 million is... Harrison, let me explain something. I pulled out my phone and opened an email. This is an offer from Samsung. 600 million for exclusive licensing rights. This one, I swiped, is from a consortium of Chinese manufacturers. 700 million. And this particularly interesting one is from Marcus's former employer, Titan Holdings. They're offering 500 million plus a CO position. The blood drained from several faces around the table. But I'm here, I continued, because despite everything, I have 12 years of history with this company. I'm offering you the chance to keep the technology that makes Apex what it is. 800 million or 3% royalty. You have 10 minutes to decide. 10 minutes? Richard Walsh sputtered. That's absurd. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. What followed was the most undignified scramble I'd ever witnessed in a boardroom. Board members huddled in corners. Phones rang. Lawyers were consulted via video call. Harrison tried twice more to negotiate, but I simply pointed at my watch. With 90 seconds remaining, Harrison called for a vote. It was unanimous, though several members looked physically ill. 800 million, Harrison said, his voice hollow. Transferred in 3 installments over 18 months. No, I smiled. 800 million transferred in full within 72 hours, or I walk out that door and call Samsung. That's impossible. The liquidity requirements. Apex has 1.2 billion in cash reserves and a 3 billion credit line. I've done my homework. Harrison. Patricia Stearns spoke for the first time. Gentlemen, my client's terms are non-negotiable. You've wasted significant time already. Shall we proceed with the agreement, or should we end this meeting? The final vote was held, 11-1 in favor, with only Harrison abstaining. David had prepared 2 sets of documents. The first transferred all patent rights back to Apex upon payment. The second was more interesting. It included a consulting agreement. Consulting? Harrison frowned. $1 per year, I explained. But it comes with a very specific clause. I retain veto power over any strategic decisions involving my patents, any attempt to claim false inventorship, any effort to diminish my contributions, and the patents revert back to me immediately. That's a poison pill. That's insurance, Harrison. Marcus taught me that contracts are only as good as their enforcement mechanisms. They signed. What choice did they have? As each board member added their signature, I thought about Marcus, probably sitting in his overpriced apartment, watching his net worth evaporate with Apex's stock collapse. His golden parachute had been revoked after the email leak proved deliberate IP theft. But I wasn't done. As the final signature was added, I pulled out one more document. There's one additional matter, I said. This is a purchase offer for Marcus Hale's equity stake in Apex. Given the recent controversy, I'm willing to buy him out at 60% of yesterday's closing price. That's generous, considering the circumstances. Richard noted, Oh, I'm not being generous. The purchase agreement includes a non-disclosure clause and a non-compete that would prevent him from working in tech for 10 years. He can take my offer, or he can watch his shares become worthless as the lawsuits pile up. Harrison actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. You've thought of everything. Marcus taught me well. Always have a backup plan. Always protect your assets. And never, ever leave yourself vulnerable to someone who thinks you're replaceable. I stood to leave, then turned back. Oh, one more thing. That resignation letter Marcus tore up? It was blank paper. The real one was never written. I never intended to leave. I just needed him to think I did. The look on their faces was worth more than the 800 million. As I walked out with David and Patricia, I heard Harrison say to the others, We just paid $800 million to someone who played us from the beginning. No, Richard Walsh corrected him. We paid $800 million to get back what was already ours, which we lost because we let an idiot with an ego problem attack the one person we couldn't afford to lose. In the elevator, Patricia turned to me. Your consulting clause, that's not about preventing future problems, is it? No, I admitted. It's about what comes next. Apex is wounded but not dead. With proper leadership, it could be extraordinary again. And you intend to provide that leadership? The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Let's just say I'm not done with Apex yet. 800 million is just the beginning. The wire transfer confirmation arrived at 11:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. $800 million, cleared and deposited. I stared at the number on my laptop screen, feeling oddly detached. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about what came next. Marcus had signed my buyout offer for his equity stake at 4:22 a.m. that same morning. According to David Kim, the man who'd stood so proudly tearing up my resignation letter was now bound by a 10-year non-compete, effectively exiled from the only industry he'd ever pretended to understand. But the real moment of reckoning came that afternoon. Harrison Vaughn called an all-hands meeting at Apex, mandatory attendance for all employees. I watched via livestream from my apartment, having been invited to observe by Richard Walsh. Harrison stood at the podium, looking every one of his 73 years. As you all know, Apex has been through a challenging period. We've made mistakes, grave mistakes, in how we valued and treated our core contributors. The camera panned across the audience. I recognized so many faces: engineers I'd mentored, researchers I'd collaborated with, support staff who'd kept the lights on during those endless development nights. Effective immediately, Harrison continued, Marcus Hale is no longer with the company. The board accepts full responsibility for the leadership failures that led to our current situation. Then came the part I'd negotiated for, the public acknowledgement that mattered more than any amount of money. We also want to formally recognize that the technological foundation of Apex Dynamics, 31 patents that power everything we make, were created by Emily Carter. Her innovations didn't just contribute to our success, they are our success. We lost sight of that truth, and it nearly destroyed us. My phone buzzed with texts from former colleagues, but I ignored them, focused on what Harrison would say next. The board has asked me to announce that we're beginning the search for a new CEO, someone who understands both technology and leadership, someone who values innovation over politics. And yes, Emily Carter has been invited to participate in the selection process through her consulting agreement. The live stream ended, but my phone immediately rang. It was Tom Bradley, Apex's largest individual shareholder after my recent purchase of Marcus's stake. Emily, we need to talk about the CEO position. Tom, I'm not interested in... Not for you. I know you better than that. You want to stay in the lab, keep creating, but you now own 18% of this company. You need someone in that office who understands your vision. He was right. The consulting agreement gave me veto power, but I needed more than that. I needed an ally in the executive suite. I have someone in mind, I said. Sarah Kim, former CTO of Nexus Technologies. She's brilliant, ethical, and actually understands the technology. Set up the meeting. If you vouch for her, she's got my vote. Over the next 3 days, I orchestrated a careful campaign. Sarah Kim met with each board member individually. I provided talking points, highlighting her successes and, more importantly, her collaborative leadership style. By Friday, she was the frontrunner. But Saturday brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. Marcus Hale stood in my doorway at 8 p.m., looking nothing like the polished executive who'd humiliated me. His suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. 5 minutes, he said. That's all I'm asking. I let him in, curious more than anything else. He sat on my couch, the same confident posture gone, replaced by something almost human. You destroyed me, he said simply. You destroyed yourself, Marcus. I just held up a mirror. He laughed bitterly. That contract clause from 9 years ago, you knew someday someone like me would come along. No, I corrected him. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped Apex would always value creation over manipulation, but I prepared for the worst while working for the best. The 10-year non-compete. Emily, that's my entire career. Everything I know is tech sales. Then learn something new. Isn't that what you told me when you cut my budget? Adapt or die. He stood to leave, then turned back. The blank paper, The resignation letter was blank paper. Actually, no. It had one line. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken before submitting it. The paper had a single sentence in tiny font at the bottom. "This is what you think I'm worth. Nothing but empty space." Marcus stared at it for a long moment. "You planned every move." "No, Marcus. I planned for every possible move. There's a difference. You played checkers, thinking one move ahead. I played chess, thinking 10 moves ahead. But more importantly, I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to survive. You turned it into a war." He left without another word. I never saw him again, though I heard he eventually moved to Arizona, selling real estate in Scottsdale. Monday morning brought the final piece of my plan into place. Sarah Kim was announced as CEO of Apex Dynamics. Her first official act was to restore the R&D budget to previous levels. Her second was to create an Innovation Fellowship, a program protecting engineers and researchers from corporate politics, ensuring they could focus on creation without fear of power plays. The ceremony for the announcement was held in the same boardroom where Marcus had torn up my letter. Sarah insisted I attend. As I stood there, watching her sign her contract, I noticed something. The torn pieces of my fake resignation letter. They were framed on the wall, assembled like a puzzle with a small plaque underneath. A reminder that brilliance cannot be torn apart, only transformed. Richard Walsh caught me looking at it. "Harrison's idea," he said quietly. "He wants every future board member to see it, to remember what happens when ego overshadows innovation." I touched the frame gently, thinking about the journey from that dingy office above the pawn shop to this moment. Marcus had tried to erase me from Apex's story. Instead, he'd cemented my place in it forever. "You won, Emily," Richard said. "No," I replied, looking at Sarah as she addressed the board with passion about Apex's future. "We all won. Marcus losing was just a necessary step to get here." 6 months later, I stood in my new lab, not at Apex, but at Prometheus Technologies, the company I'd kept dormant for 9 years. The $800 million had been transformed into something more powerful than money: freedom. The building was everything Apex's sterile headquarters wasn't. Exposed brick walls, vintage equipment displayed alongside cutting-edge technology, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. But the real difference was the people. Every engineer Marcus had driven away, every researcher who'd been crushed by corporate politics, they were here now, building something new. Sarah Kim visited me at 3:30 p.m. on a Thursday, 6 months into her tenure as Apex's CEO. The company's stock had recovered and surpassed its previous high. The toxic culture Marcus had cultivated was slowly being replaced by something healthier, more collaborative. "The board wants to buy Prometheus," she said without preamble. "They're offering $2 billion. I laughed, gesturing around my lab. "Sarah, look at this place. We have 17 patents pending, 32 engineers who actually smile when they come to work, and 0 bureaucracy. Why would I sell that?" "Because with Apex's resources, you could change the world." "I already did that once. This time, I'm doing it on my terms." She nodded, understanding. "The offer stands if you change your mind. But Emily, the real reason I'm here is to thank you." "For what?" "For not destroying Apex when you could have. You held all the cards. You could have licensed those patents to competitors, buried the company completely. Instead, you gave us a second chance." I turned to face the window, watching the ferry cross the bay. Apex was never the enemy. Sarah, it was home for 12 years. Marcus was a cancer, but he wasn't the body. Removing him was about saving Apex, not destroying it. "Still playing chess while everyone else plays checkers?" "No, I'm not playing anymore. I'm building." That night, the Seattle Tech Awards announced their Engineer of the Year. I didn't attend. I was in the lab with my team, working on a quantum processing breakthrough that would make our previous innovations look primitive. But someone live-streamed the moment they called my name. Harrison Vaughn accepted on my behalf. His speech brief but pointed. Emily Carter reminds us that true power doesn't come from titles or corner offices. It comes from the ability to create something from nothing, to see possibilities where others see obstacles. She also reminds us that contracts matter. So read the fine print. The audience laughed, but those who knew the story understood the deeper message. A year after that boardroom humiliation, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a single piece of paper, the original employment contract from 12 years ago, Section 12.4.3, highlighted in gold. The note attached was in Harrison's handwriting, framing this in the boardroom next to your resignation letter, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moves are made years before the game even begins. I hung a copy in my office at Prometheus, right next to a photo from those early days above the pawn shop, 5 exhausted engineers, grinning despite the chaos, believing they could change the world. We had, just not in the way any of us expected. The truth about revenge is that it's never really about the person who wronged you. It's about reclaiming your own story. Marcus thought he could erase me, reduce 12 years of innovation to nothing with a theatrical gesture. Instead, he taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. True security doesn't come from trusting others to value your worth. It comes from making sure they can't afford not to. My phone buzzed with a message from David Kim. Just got a call. Marcus is trying to challenge the non-compete. Want me to handle it? I typed back, let him try. I'm too busy building the future to worry about the past. And the quantum processor we'd been developing was showing promise beyond our wildest calculations. 3 major universities wanted to partner with us. The Department of Defense was interested in our encryption applications. Prometheus Technologies was becoming what I'd always dreamed Apex could be, a place where innovation mattered more than politics, where creation trumped manipulation. Looking back, I should thank Marcus Hale. His cruelty forced me to stop being comfortable in the shadows. His betrayal taught me to protect myself. His arrogance showed me that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's becoming so successful that they become irrelevant. I own 18% of Apex Dynamics now, the largest individual shareholder. Sarah sends me monthly updates, though the consulting agreement means I already know every major decision before it's made. The company that once tried to erase me now can't make a move without my shadow over it. But here's the real plot twist. I don't care about Apex anymore. It's a good investment, a nice safety net, but it's not my future. My future is here at Prometheus, with the team of dreamers and builders who understand that the next big breakthrough is always just one late night away. Sometimes, when I'm working late, and I still do, because old habits die hard, I think about that moment in the boardroom, Marcus standing over me, confetti from my torn letter at his feet, victory written across his face. He thought he was writing the ending to my story. He was wrong. He was just giving me the perfect beginning to a much better one. My name is Emily Carter. I spent 12 years building someone else's dream, had it stolen from me in front of an audience, and turned that theft into the greatest opportunity of my life. The man who tried to destroy me is selling houses in Arizona, bound by a non-compete he signed in desperation. The company that betrayed me now pays me to exist. And I'm exactly where I always should have been, in a lab, building the future, with no one's permission needed but my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? Let's discuss.